Hi, everybody. I just wanted to chat about effectiveness rate. So I was reading the COVID-19 vaccine story from Pfizer and BioNTech, and they talked about a effectiveness rate, and I couldn't quite figure out what that meant. And so what I've done here is just created a quick spreadsheet for us to look at. The data that I've got from the article there says the number of participants was 44,000, which I assume means they've got 22,000 in the placebo group and 22 in the vaccine group. And if you read that article, they started off by saying that they were going to wait until they got 32 positive cases, and I think they had to also have at least one symptom. And so that out of 32, what we can do is sort of play around with some hypothetical outcomes. So if 32 of the, if there were 32 positive cases, then we want to figure out how many came from each of the two groups. So if we start off by saying it seems reasonable to expect that half of them would come from the placebo and half of them would come from the vaccine group if the vaccine was just not effective. So if we've got our first 32 cases and it turns out that we have 16 in each, then the effectiveness rate of the vaccine would be 0%. So if we wanted to sort of hypothetically say, well, what would it look like if the vaccine was more effective? So we could change this 16 to a 20. And if we change that to 20, what we see is that the other 12 had to have come from the vaccine group or vaccinated group. So a couple things that took me a minute to figure out here, think through here, is that if the infections in the placebo group is 20, I think we should be expecting that there should be the same number in the vaccine group again if the vaccination isn't effective, which would mean that we should have had a total of 40 cases, but we only had 32. So if you look down here, this sort of breakdown for me how I thought about the effectiveness rate, in the vaccine group, we should have had the same number of infections. So we should have had 20 cases in the vaccination group. They only reported 12, which means we can think of that as being 8 cases that were suppressed. 8 cases didn't happen in the vaccination group that should have. So 8 were stopped out of what should have been 20. So that is a 40% effectiveness rate. And so now we can go back. This was their first, Pfizer said their first goal was to wait until they had 32 cases come in. And what they said was they would continue the study if 5 or fewer came from the infection group, the vaccine group. So that should mean 27 here. So it looks like what they were aiming for was out of the first 32 cases, they wanted to have 27, or if 27 came from the placebo group and 5 or fewer came from the vaccine group, that would correlate to an 80% approximately effectiveness rate. So again, if we look down here, the predicted cases in the vaccine group, it should match the placebo group if the vaccine is just not effective. But it looks like we actually only had 5 cases, or they only had 5 cases in the vaccine group, which means the vaccine seems to stop 22, and then we have to figure out 22 out of how many, and our guess is that it should be 22 out of 27. So that's an 80% effectiveness rate. Again, another way to think about it is if the placebo group generated 27 cases, the vaccine group should have also generated 27 cases, which should have been 54 cases, but we only reported 32, which means it suppressed 22, the vaccine suppressed 22 cases that should have been in the total count. So if you read the article, they talk about how Pfizer was going to go until they had 62, I think, and then in discussion and back and forth with the FDA, they actually said it came out that they already had 92 cases or 94 cases. So out of 94 cases, again, we would expect 47 would correlate or would relate to a 0% effectiveness. So now, if we say, well, what percent or how many infections would have to be in the placebo group for us to get that same 80% effectiveness rate? And so if we look at the Excel file here, we can actually go up to the tools and go to goal seek. Rather than changing this 47 to 50 and 60 and guessing, we can say we want to set F12 to, and then if we do that same 0.8 threshold, and we're going to just keep changing cell F10 until we get there, Excel will just sort of ramp this up for us until we get 78 and 16. And this is, I had this round to just the nearest integer, so this isn't exact, but 78 and 16 cases should give you an effectiveness rate of 80%. Again, we should have seen the same, if the vaccine is 0% effective, we should have seen 78 cases in the vaccination group, but we only saw 16, which means it stopped 63, but it's 63 out of the predicted 78 for an 80% effectiveness rate. So the last piece of information that Pfizer shared with us was that the effectiveness rate was actually 90%. I don't know why they didn't just give us these numbers, and that's what started me off being curious on this. So now the effectiveness rate, if we want this effectiveness rate to be 80%, we can go back to, just to try this tool again, so do the goal seek tool. We can say we want to set F2 to 0.9 by changing F12 and F10, that is. I hit OK, and it gives us 85 and 9. So it looks as though Pfizer's initial study, they collected 94 positive cases. 85 of them came from the placebo group, 9 came from the vaccination group, 9 or fewer, I should say, came from the vaccination group. And again, it took me a while to figure out how to interpret that. I think the rationale here is there were 9 cases in the vaccination group. We should have predicted 85 because it should have matched the placebo group if the vaccine was 0% effective. That means it stopped 77 cases out of a potential 85, which gives us the 90% effectiveness rate.